You walk out to the garden in the morning, same as yesterday, same as every morning this week. And there they are again, yellow flowers lying on the dirt. Not one, not two. The whole cluster dropped overnight. You have been tending this plant since spring. You watered. You fed it. You did everything right. And you are standing here in June with no fruit and no explanation. The thing doing this to your tomatoes is not what most people think it is. And fertilizer may not be saving it the way you think. What actually fixes this is already sitting in your kitchen drawer. If your tomatoes are dropping flowers, you already know what most people do next. They add more fertilizer. They water more. They buy something new at the garden center and hope it works. And the flowers keep falling anyway. In the next few minutes, you'll see the real reason those flowers never become tomatoes, the tiny signal hiding on the flower cluster that tells you whether a flower still has a chance, and the kitchen tool that does something a $30 bottle of fertilizer never could. But before any of that, you need to see what is happening to your plant that you cannot see from the outside. Here is what most gardeners never realize. A tomato plant covered in yellow flowers is not always a healthy plant. Sometimes it is a plant that has been quietly pushed in the wrong direction, and the flowers are the only evidence left behind. In June, the plant needs to shift where it sends its energy. Not stop growing, but change its priorities. Less into new stems and leaves, more into holding the flowers it already has open. But many all-purpose fertilizers, especially the ones with a high first number on the label, keep pushing the plant to grow. More leaves, bigger stems, taller, greener, fuller, and the plant responds. It looks incredible. Dark green, strong, thick from top to bottom. That is exactly when the flowers start falling. The plant is not struggling. It is not starving. From the outside, it looks like your best season yet. And that is the part that makes this so easy to miss and so expensive to find out too late. Now look at your flower cluster next time you walk past. If you know what to look for, that cluster is already telling you something, whether each flower still has a window or whether that window has already closed. Most people walk right past it because nobody told them there was something to look for. But before that signal makes sense, you need to understand what has to happen inside that flower, the part that decides whether it becomes a tomato or ends up on the ground. Almost every gardening video skips this entirely. You have stood in the garden center reading the back of a fertilizer bottle. You have checked the plant every morning. You have done everything the label told you to do, and the flowers kept falling. That is not failure. That is what happens when the advice stopped before it got to the part that actually matters. Gardeners used to know that part. Not because they studied it, because they watched their plants closely enough, season after season, to notice something most people never think to look for. Look at a tomato flower when it is fully open. The petals curl back and away from the center, almost folded behind themselves. The yellow cone in the middle stands out on its own. That is the signal. When you see a flower looking exactly like that, open, dry, petals pulled back, that flower is in its window. Something has to happen inside that cone before it closes. If nothing does, the flower drops, and it will not reopen. Most gardeners see the flower. They see it fall. They never see what was supposed to happen in the hours in between. You might assume bees handle this, and bees do visit tomato flowers. But not every bee that visits your garden can actually do what needs to be done here. Some bees are built for it. The way they move against a flower, the vibration they create, is what causes the pollen to release. Most insects that pass through your garden simply do not move that way. And even the bees that can do it, you cannot build your whole harvest around whether one shows up at the right flower at the right moment. So the window opens. And most of the time, nothing comes. The plant does not need more fertilizer right now. It needs something to happen during that window. And what that something is, that is what almost every gardening video never gets to. Tomato flowers are built differently from most flowers in your garden. A squash flower opens wide. A bee crawls inside, picks up pollen, carries it to the next flower. Simple, visible. Tomato flowers do not work that way. The pollen is locked inside a tight cone at the center of the flower. It does not sit in the open. It has to be shaken loose. And when it releases, it falls directly onto the stigma inside that same flower. That is the moment a tomato begins. In a garden with the right pollinators, bumblebees handle this. They grip the flower and vibrate their body, not their wings, but their muscles, with enough force to shake the pollen free from that cone. Researchers call it buzz pollination. It is not a gentle visit. It is a deliberate physical act. But here is where it breaks down for most home gardens. Not every garden has bumblebees you can count on. And wind can help, but you cannot build a whole harvest around whether a breeze arrives at exactly the right flower, at exactly the right moment, so the pollen stays trapped. The flower waits, and then it falls. This is not bad luck. This is not poor soil. This is a mechanical problem. And it has been happening in backyards for generations, quietly, invisibly, while gardeners kept reaching for fertilizer, trying to fix something that fertilizer was never designed to touch. The problem was never what you were feeding the plant. It was always what was not happening inside that flower. You already have something in your kitchen that can create that vibration. You have held it in your hand more times than you can count. Tomorrow morning, it is going outside with you. Go to your kitchen and pick up a metal spoon. Not a special tool. Not something you order online. The spoon you used at breakfast this morning. Bring it outside after 10 o'clock. When the dew has dried and the flowers are open and dry to the touch, find a flower cluster that is actively blooming. Place the back of the spoon against the main stem, just below that cluster, close enough that when you tap, you can feel a faint vibration travel upward toward the flowers. That is the contact point. Not the flower itself, not the cage across the row. The stem, just below the cluster you are working on. Tap it gently, about 5 seconds. Long enough for several short pulses to reach the flower, short enough that you are not stressing the plant. That vibration moves up into the cone. The pollen shakes loose. It falls onto the stigma inside the same flower. That is all it takes. Repeat this at every open cluster, every morning, for the next week. Some of the clusters that were dropping before may start to hold. Where there was nothing forming, small fruit may begin to appear. But there is a mistake that makes this far less effective. And it has nothing to do with the spoon or how hard you tap. It is entirely about when you do it. Get the timing wrong. And the 5 seconds you just spent may have done nothing at all. There are 3 times when tapping makes little difference. First, before the dew has dried. Vet pollen does not move. It stays in place. The vibration happens, but nothing is released. Second, on humid mornings after rain, even when the flower looks dry from a distance. High moisture in the air can make it harder for pollen to move freely. Third, too late in the afternoon, when the flower has already begun to close. Tap at the wrong time, and you will feel like the method failed. You will stop, and the flowers will keep falling, not because the approach is wrong, but because the window was already closed. A simple field check. Touch a petal lightly with one finger. If it feels dry and soft, that is your window. Come back if it does not feel right yet. The most reliable time tends to be between 10 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, on a dry day. One honest note before moving on. This addresses the pollination side of flower drop. There are other reasons tomato flowers fall. Heat stress, uneven watering, temperatures that stay too high at night. If those are present, they need their own attention. But if dropped flowers are the main issue you are dealing with, this is where to start. You will look at a flower cluster differently now. Not just a flower. A window, open for a short time each morning, waiting for something to happen. You walk past that window every day this season without knowing it was there. Now you know what to bring. 5 seconds. The right moment. A spoon from your kitchen. That is the part most gardening advice never reaches. And if one thing this simple was quietly costing you fruit all along, it raises a harder question. What else is happening inside that plant that you cannot see from the outside? Because there is a second reason tomato flowers drop. And it has nothing to do with pollen. Nothing to do with bees or vibration. It tends to show up right when you think the plant has finally turned a corner. Some gardeners do everything in this video correctly. They tap at the right time. They start seeing small fruit where there was nothing the week before. Then, a few days later, those small fruit are gone. The plant looks fine. No wilting, no yellowing, nothing you would point to and say, there, that is the problem. But the fruit that was just beginning to form has disappeared. This is not the same problem you just solved. What happens here starts earlier than you think, before the fruit is even visible. The plant makes a calculation about what it can sustain. And sometimes, fruit that already formed is the first thing it lets go. The trigger is usually something the gardener is already doing. Not something wrong, exactly. Something mistimed. And it tends to happen right when you think the plant has finally turned a corner. That is what the next video covers. Not why flowers drop. Why young fruit disappears after you did everything right to get it there. If you have ever walked out to find fruit gone that was there yesterday, that video will explain exactly what you were looking at. One question before you go. Has young fruit ever dropped on you? After the flowers held and the fruit started forming? Leave it below. It tells me whether this is happening to you right now or something you want to prevent. Because the flower problem and the fruit problem look similar from the outside, but they come from completely different places inside the plant. And knowing the difference is what separates a season that works from one that almost did.